This story shocked the whole America. The Christmas holiday for the Ramsey family from Boulder became a real nightmare. In the basement of their home, the Ramsey couple found the body of their daughter with signs of violent death. The little girl was only 6 years old. She was called Little Barbie because of her doll-like appearance. Police questioned more than 1,000 suspects, but none of them was arrested. Who killed the most beautiful girl in the United States? And why, almost 30 years later, the culprit is not still punished? JonBenet Ramsey was the second child in the family. She, as well as her older brother Burke, did not need anything. The head of the family, John Ramsey, ran his company. Business was going good, and colleagues called the successful businessman Billionaire John. His wife, Patsy Ramsey, formerly Miss West Virginia, took care of home and children. Especially much attention Patsy paid to her daughter. The little girl grew up a real beauty. Blonde hair, big blue eyes, charming smile. Mother, who once dreamed of getting the title of Miss America, closely engaged in the modeling career of her daughter. To get the girl noticed, Patsy took her to auditions and fashion shows. The outfits for the contests were sewn by Pam Griffin, a neighbor and friend of the Ramsey family. According to her, at the age of 4, JonBenet behaved like an 18-year-old. The girl had adult makeup, hair, and manners. Pam recalls that once sewed the little beauty a miniature ball gown made of satin, decorated with French lace and pearls. It cost Mr. Ramsey $750. But the father did not spare money for his daughter. Model. The girl grew up smart and quickly learned to wear frank dresses, defile and pose on the podium. While everyone was debating whether JonBenet wanted to perform, or whether her father and mother were forcibly dragging her to pageants, young Ramsey won the titles: Colorado State All-Star Kids Cover Girl, America's Royal Miss, Little Miss Charlevoix, National Tiny Miss Beauty, Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Christmas. Newspapers and magazines wrote about the most beautiful girl in the country. She was shown on TV. Parents rejoiced at JonBenet's success. Meanwhile, many Americans condemned the Ramsey family. They're using the girl, making her look sexy, people said. John and Patsy did not pay attention to such statements, considered them to be just ordinary envy.
911 emergency.
On the morning of December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey called 911. A woman screamed into the phone that her 6-year-old daughter was missing, that she had found a strange note on the stairs of the house. The handwritten note consisted of 3 sheets of paper. Your daughter is currently in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you wish to see her in 1997, you must follow our instructions exactly, the message read. Unknown persons demanded ransom for the girl, $118,000 US, 100,000 in $100 bills and 18,000 in 20 bills. The kidnappers promised to call tomorrow between 8 and 10 a.m. to agree on the place and time of ransom. And they warned, if the Ramseys contacted police and brought counterfeit or marked bills, their daughter would be beheaded. The police arrived quickly, and just as quickly, a crowd of onlookers gathered around the Ramsey house. There were a lot of people in the house too. While the cops searched for evidence, JonBenet's parents were meeting friends. They wanted to give the family moral support, but in the end, they only hindered the investigation. Later, investigative journalist Diane Diamond said that the police did a disgusting job at the scene of the alleged crime. The area around the house was not cordoned off. Family members, friends of the Ramseys moved freely around the house. And the kitchen was cleaned up, which could have been fingerprinted by the intruders. In this chaos, JonBenet's parents waited for a call from the kidnappers. The little girl's father worried that tomorrow was not December 26th, but December 27th. After all, no one knew exactly when the criminals wrote the instruction, but at the specified time, no one called. A few hours later, the police left the Ramsey house. Only Detective Linda Arndt remained. She suggested that John Ramsey look around the house and check his daughter's belongings. The father found baby JonBenet in the basement. the part of the house that the police had not searched. The girl's breathless body lay on a white blanket. Her hands were tied above her head. Her mouth was taped shut with duct tape. John knelt down in front of his daughter's corpse, peeled the duct tape off her mouth. He touched his hand to John Bennett's cheek. It was unaccustomedly red. The father tried to untee the ropey wrappet around the child's wrists but failed. Then he moved the body from the cellar to the room. Forensic experts determined that 6-year-old John Benet had been hit on the head, suffered a skull fracture, and was strangled with a homemade garrote, a stick with a noose. Traces of blood were found on John Benet's underwear. The victim may have been sexually assaulted, the forensic report said. And the red marks on the child's face and back were likely caused by an electric taser, according to medical experts. The first suspects in the murder of little Barbie were her parents. According to crime statistics, at that age, children tend to die at the hands of their closest relatives. The ransom note was written with a ballpoint pen on sheets torn from the notebook of the little girl's mother. The pen also belonged to the Ramsey family. The investigators were also confused by the strange, not round, amount for the ransom, $118,000. Shortly before the girl's murder, the head of the family received a nice dividend from his company. Exactly $118,000. How many people knew about it? I think not many, said former FBI agent and ABC News consultant Brad Garrett. Police suspected that the father and mother may have harmed their child in some way, then panicked and tried to stage a kidnapping. The third suspect was John Benet Burke's older brother. During the autopsy, experts found undigested pieces of pineapple in the girl's stomach. A plate of the fruit was in the refrigerator in the Ramsey kitchen. Burke's fingerprints were on the dish. Jealousy murder was another motive. As part of the investigation, the entire family gave blood and fingerprints, but John and Patsy refused to testify in writing. They also ignored interrogations. They were further represented by experienced attorneys. The couple hired them at great expense. 14 years after the tragedy, John tried to explain why he and his wife did not cooperate with the investigation. According to the man, the whole family was grieving deeply at the time. Patsy Ramsey was lying in bed and could barely move. John Benet's funeral was then a priority. The most beautiful girl in America was buried in Marietta, Georgia, Ramsey's hometown, on December 31st, 1996. And on January 1st, 1997, the day after the funeral, the Ramsey couple gave an interview to CNN and begged the public to help them find their daughter's killer. Patsy was outraged that police had made her and her husband the prime suspects in the murder. And John said, "How could they think that? We were a normal family." To be close to their angel, the Ramseys even moved to Atlanta. Investigators hoped that the husband and wife would visit their daughter's grave and perhaps talk about the murder in the cemetery. Video surveillance was set up at the grave, and a wiretap was installed in the headstone. But the police plan failed. The grieving couple were clearly not in a hurry to go to the cemetery. They were busy setting up their new home. 3 months after the murder, District Attorney Alex Hunter brought retired detective Andrew Lewis Smith, who had previously solved several high-profile cases, into the investigation. Hunter believed that the police were fixated on the parents' guilt and were not considering other versions of the murder. After examining the case, Smith believed the intruder entered the house from the street. On the day of the murder, the basement window was open, but in photos taken after the tragedy, the window was covered in cobwebs in some places. There was no way for the perpetrator to get through the window without hitting the cobwebs. Detective Smith wondered when the photos were taken. After all, spiders weave webs pretty quickly. In addition, a high-tech shoe print was found in the basement next to the dead girl. No one in the Ramsey family wore high-tech shoes. The main version of the investigation finally fell apart after the results of DNA examination. Under the fingernails and on the child's underwear, they found DNA of a stranger. It did not match the genetic material of anyone in the Ramsey family. However, Boulder police did not immediately release the results of that examination. The first formal questioning of JonBenet's parents took place in the spring of 1997. A year later, there was another interview, which investigators videotaped. In both cases, the Ramseys denied involvement in the murder. Detective Smith was convinced that the clue to the crime lay in the DNA found. By 2008, the United States had developed a new, more accurate DNA testing technology called touch DNA. The JonBenet case was re-examined. The study used genetic material from the girl's clothing. The test confirmed the innocence of the girl's parents. The DNA belonged to an unknown man, or possibly even two men. That same year, John and Betsy Ramsey were cleared of all suspicion, but the girl's mother was no longer alive at that time. In 2006, she died of ovarian cancer. She was buried next to her daughter. In this strange, convoluted story, new suspects periodically emerged. In 2002, a journalist who was making a documentary about the murder of little Barbie received a phone call from a man. He introduced himself as a former school teacher of JonBenet and said he knew who had massacred the girl. The man's name was John Mark Carr. During the following conversation, he allegedly stated that he liked JonBenet a lot, was sexually attracted to the little girl, and eventually killed the 6-year-old beauty. Police later discovered that Carr changed jobs frequently. He would quit one school and take a job at another because of complaints from students' parents. After getting a search warrant, the cops checked the educator's place. They found child pornography. In 2006, John Mark Carr was arrested, but a DNA test of his DNA again led the investigation to a dead end. There was no match. The real suspect in the murder of America's most beautiful girl didn't come forward until 2019. It's pedophile Gary Oliva. At the time, he was already serving time for possession of child pornography. He was also found in possession of more than 300 photos of baby girl JonBenet. The convict wrote letters to his classmate Michael Vale and once confessed to killing JonBenet. Michael took the letters to the police. Gary Oliva described in detail how the girl died. According to him, he accidentally let her go and the girl hit her head. Oliva watched the child die. In one of the letters, the pedophile wrote that JonBenet completely changed him, delivered him from evil. Oliva repeatedly asked his friend to send him pictures of JonBenet. He called the girl his religion, his Jesus Christ. Michael Vale claims it was possible to arrest Oliva on a hot lead. On the second day after the murder, he informed police about a strange phone call from Gary Oliva. On the phone, Gary confessed to a classmate that he had hurt a little girl. He sobbed and repeated the phrase many times. When Michael asked where he was, Gary replied, "In Boulder." If Michael is to be believed, police recorded his message, but no one contacted him for details. A second call from the man was ignored by law enforcement authorities. At the same time, interesting facts from the life of a vagrant, drunkard, and pedophile Gary Oliva surfaced. In 1990, he was accused of raping a 7-year-old girl. And in 1991, Ha was charged with attempted murder. The man tried to strangle his mother with a telephone cord. Burke Ramsey, recalling his murdered sister, suggested that the pedophile had spotted her at one of the many beauty pageants her mother took her to. Already as an adult, he admitted how hard he survived the death of JonBenet. Burke complained about journalists. They were on duty under the house for a long time. According to the young man, it was then that he developed an aversion to publicity, closed himself off, and began to lead a secluded life. To JonBenet's parents, the media scrutiny and publicity didn't seem so burdensome. The family even won several courts against publications that published fakes about their daughter's death. Remuneration for moral damage was impressive. By court order, 2 American magazines paid the couple about $4 million. The book, The Death of Innocence, written by the couple, was well sold. It was a biography of the little miss with reflections on her last day of life. After his wife Betsy's death, John published a book of memoirs, The Other Side of Suffering. He detailed the moment he found his dead daughter in the basement, his experience and his faith in God that helped him get out of spiritual darkness. Beyond that, John asked himself, why did he put his daughter on display? Why did he and his wife have parties and let strangers into the house? Why did he drag his child to beauty pageants? I will never forgive myself for this, writes the father of Joan Bennett. The girl's murder is still unsolved. Gary Oliva, who is serving time for another crime, has not been charged with the girl's murder due to insufficient evidence in the case. The evidence that does exist is circumstantial. Gary Oliva is scheduled to be released in March of 2024. A few years ago, the Boulder Police Department said that over the years the investigation there have been analyzed about 1,000 DNA samples from potential rapists of the girl. Those men have been questioned, and they are not connected to the death of John Benet Ramsey.